So we've discussed Raniere's multi-level marketing pyramid scheme entities. And strangely enough, rather than say focusing on money, the group seems to focus on Raniere's desire for power, his desire for control, and also his desire for sex. Just to jump off on a side note, it is called essentially a sex cult. However, really the sex cult part of it was only the DOS portion. All right, so the rest of it, not everyone that went through ESP was involved in any kind of sex. So let's just be really clear about that. But however, this story is so fascinating that going through, say, the court transcripts, I was literally popcorn, getting the popcorn, popping it, just going, oh my gosh, there's so much that hasn't been revealed about this group, or at least the little avenues and all the different players. And it's just a really dense subject matter. And in my opinion, the criminal trial that went down only just scratched the surface of this thing. And maybe that's just me thinking out of the box, but there's a lot going on here. So let's get into this. And there's so many companies under this NXIVM group, and I'm going to get into all of it, by the way, so that allegedly, if one of the entities is shut down, the institution can't be totally destroyed. All right, so if you have an umbrella level NXIVM and all these little companies underneath it, if anything goes awry in any of the little companies, the whole entity, the whole pyramid structure, the whole structure doesn't fall apart. Additionally, as a renunciate, okay, that's what Keith purported himself to be, he didn't like to have things in his own name. So a lot of these companies, in fact, I don't think any of them are in his own name. You're going to be shocked when we go through the list of the companies. So allegedly, and this is allegedly, under the tax code at that time, under certain circumstances, the companies, they were allowed to pay less tax depending on how many companies there were and what those companies did. So allegedly, there was also some kind of tax consequence to having the NXIVM structure as it was presented. So let's get into it. All right, so you've got NXIVM. That's the head umbrella company and all its affiliated programs. I'm just going to give you a broad brush of them. We're just going to keep it moving because the people, to me, are what's the resource, not these little entities. But let's go through it. You had ESP, that's the Executive Success Program, and it turned into NXIVM, which was the umbrella. So ESP was Executive Success Program. We talked about that in the first episode. You have ethicist, like ethics, ethicist. I think this was created in 2006. I'm going to be really loosey-goosey with these time periods because I'm pulling this from court files, so it's people's recollection of things. The ethicist group or class or module or whatever you want to call it was supposed to help people figure out how to become ethical. Did you need a class for that? What are your ethics and how to improve them? So that was another group. Another one was called The Source. I know this was operating in 2014. I'm not sure if it operated before then. More than likely it did. It was a program for presenters and performers. So this was the acting curriculum. Again, if you spread yourself around, you can get different people interested in different things. So someone could come into the group, take the early training classes, and then want to be in this source group with these other actors and actresses. Okay, so you're going to have different ways that people are going to get into this group. So then you have JNess, and this group is the one that spawns into DOS, all right? So this group turns dark, in my opinion. It's the sisterhood or women's group. It spawns the DOS, the master slave order that was the quote-unquote sex cult, and it was started by Pam Kafritz, all right? She ends up passing away. We'll get into the timeline of all the ladies, all right? All the different victims and victimizers. So JNess, this sisterhood group, it was a way also for, in my opinion, Raniere to separate the men from the women. But it was sold as a sisterhood group, get together, women's issues and things like that. So that's JNess. Then you have JNess Tracks. This group was a spawned off of JNess, and it was supposed to explore gender roles. Allegedly, JNess Tracks was really expensive and very lucrative for NXIVM. They were trying to understand the male's point of view. So this is a woman's class to try to understand the male's point of view. And they allegedly taught these women that men weren't monogamous, okay, and women are monogamous. So it was these gender roles, and that the victim is the abuser. I know, let it sink in, that complaining is abusing. And Raniere is quoted, and I think sometimes in the different documentaries, it's out of context, but I think it was under the context of JNess Tracks. But regardless, Raniere was quoted as saying, the screaming of abuse is abuse in itself. So that was JNess Tracks. Then you had DOS, which was created in 2015. But if you stay with me on this story, you'll find that, in my opinion, Keith was already engaging in master-slave relations with certain women already, or he was already laying that groundwork. It just wasn't institutionalized in DOS yet. Okay, so stay with me on that one. This is my opinion, right? But 2015, then you have the DOS. That's the master-slave. That's the secret society. It was formed, and the slaves would make a lifetime vow to their master, and Raniere was the grandmaster. So think, first line, you'd have Raniere being the master of a first line group of women, slaves. And then if they enrolled slaves, or took on slaves, then they have the first line slaves would be their master, and he would be the grandmaster, and then so on and so forth. The more it goes down in a pyramid, with the people, the women physically being the resources. I know it's disgusting, and we'll get to that, but I'm just going to keep it moving through the companies. You have SOP, which was called Society of Protectors. This one was created, I believe it was operational in 2011. Again, Society of Protectors. It promoted men and masculinity, as if we haven't had enough of that already in this, all right? But let's go. Male counterpart of JNess. So you have JNess teaching women a certain way. Then you had the SOP, because the men wanted to have a JNess. Okay, so that's what SOP was. They were really militant, and they performed readiness drills. And this will become important because the readiness drills end up being used in DOS as well. So readiness drills are when you have someone that's essentially the one in charge, and they will have a group of people, and those people are supposed to be ready, and they're supposed to be ready to move and do what you want, and each person has 1 minute to respond. When someone texts them a question mark, just, Theolyn, question mark, and I would be, as the person doing the readiness drill, would have to respond within a minute with ready, okay? Text back ready. And then if I had a group, then they all had to respond ready in 1 minute. Otherwise, then you'd get consequences. So the idea was, anything that goes on that the group needs, that you have a team ready to go to help you with your issue. And you got to start thinking, like, why are you doing these militant operations? What dark side was this going to go to once this is fully realized? All right, so this could go on all night, by the way. Like at 3 a.m, someone could be sleeping and they'd get a text, it'd be a question mark, and they'd have to hop up and type in ready really fast, and then also look to see if the other folks were also being, meeting the drill. And if not, I think sometimes you had a buddy, you had to call and be like, text them really quick, like, get up, text ready. Nuts, all right? So the legal owner of this was also Pam Fritz. Then you have SOP Complete, because SOP 1 wasn't good enough, so you got to have SOP Complete, and this is for the women. I know these groups, these modules, these classes, these entities, they're nuts. SOP Complete for the women was regimental, like the men's, and it was an 8-day program, and in my opinion, it was just a bunch of misogyny. You have the women were treated like boys. They were told that boys are treated different than girls in society, so they're going to break it down to the women so they know how little boys were treated growing up. So they're going to teach women what it's like to be a man. So the women that enrolled in this subjected themselves to abuse and to insults hurled at them, and they had to accept this abuse and these insults at 100% feedback. So whatever a person, Johnny Rotten felt like saying that day to a woman about how she looked, how she presented herself, how she responded, how she rolled her eyes, how she clicked her teeth, whatever she did, and it didn't even have to be something bad. It could just be like how she crossed her legs. He had full reign to say, you make me want to do this to you, or you make me feel this way, and the girls just had to take it. That was like the whole exercise. So supposedly, this was supposed to teach a woman how to have character, but it just seemed like an exercise in humiliation. And I don't know many people who went through SOP Complete, the women, that were happy with it. And I think even some of the men felt bad that they had to be so nasty to the women, or to, you know, mine these horrible parts of their subconscious to spew out to the women. I mean, in life, I think that people have thoughts and opinions, and not every thought and opinion has to come out of your mouth, correct? And this is something I even have to learn as an adult, because I tend to say what's on my mind. But in life, you don't, you know, just spew out nasty things. You use a filter. And if you have things from your subconscious that you think about people that are not PC, to just be like blasting it at them and they're exposed to take it, that's horrible. But that's what the SOP Complete was. Then you had EXO, ESO. So that's called XOSO. And this one seemed rather innocuous. It was a body fitness group. So they did like yoga and different classes. Classes are always called modules, by the way. They're not called classes. And that was supposed to develop strength and flexibility. So seemingly that group was rather innocuous. You had Rainbow Cultural Gardens. This group was run allegedly by a woman named Loretta Garza. By the way, I don't know a lot about her, and she is one of the, I believe she was one of the first line, but I don't really know anything about her. There was a group of nannies, so you could join the group and be a nanny. I don't think you needed any qualifications whatsoever to teach children foreign languages, to teach them multiple foreign languages. They would play the music from the country, they would eat the food from the country, they would speak the language from the country, they would try to surround the children with the country's culture. And they sold it at, you know, to get people into NXIVM, to have your kids be, you know, very multilingual and things like that. And allegedly, the Rainbow Cultural Gardens was more expensive than a private school. And it was just run by just people, you know? And some of them you'll find were like nationals from another country here illegally. So keep that in mind too. And in my mind, and I don't think they went deep into this, this could have gone dark. I don't know why this entity existed. Then we have Simply Human. That was the singing group. So y'all have an acting group. You also have a singing group. You know, like say Allison Mack was in that, I believe. Bonnie Peace, that's Mark Vicenti's wife. She was in it. So if you were into singing, you could, maybe it was their choir. Who knows? Then you have a group called First Principles. This is the company that owned the tech for NXIVM. That's the education. So when Raniere had an idea, he told someone, or it would always be transcribed. It would always be filmed, and there would be audio of him just even walking around. He was like so special that everybody had the cameras rolling all the time for him. So if he had an idea for something, someone would term it a download. Like, so if he came to say, you know, I have an idea, Nancy, about this. So it would be a download. And what she would do is Nancy, say Saltzman, would record it. She would transcribe it. And she would turn the idea into education. So his thoughts and his concepts would be made into tech. And, you know, maybe it'd even be made into a company. So that's how we've got all these different groups doing all these different things. Because Keith would have these ideas and he would download these ideas into people. In First Principles, the tech is this group. This group is for the tech. It's for rational inquiry. It's for EMs. That's the exploration of meaning. Again, all this is in part 1. And the body of NXIVM's educational teachings. That's First Principles. Then you have something called Delegates. This one, I mean, some of these gave me a real good chuckle. All right. Delegates are for assistants to do certain tasks for you anywhere. So you could join a group where you're somebody's gopher. Yeah, I know. And then here's one that never got off the floor. But this one, again, this one could have gone real dark. Okay, it's called 10C. And that stands for The Emperor Has No Clothes. So TENC, 10C. The Emperor Has No Clothes. That was the hidden name for it, allegedly. Young women were supposed to be recruited from college sororities into NXIVM. And of course, this one failed, thank the Lord. But yeah, I don't hear a lot of people talking about 10C. Maybe it was just a download that never went anywhere. You know, maybe nobody was hopped up to be with these older people. If they went to campuses or something, I don't know if they did. But if they went to campuses, who's going to be interested in this old dude and his older women to someone who's in a sorority? Okay, so That's the groups that I know of. There are about 60 companies allegedly under the NXIVM umbrella. I'm not going to talk about any more of them, but just to give you an idea, is your mind kind of blown? Did you know that? Well, now you know a little bit more, right? So let's get into it. All right, here's the part where I'm going to be talking about the people and try to put it in a timeline, because a lot of the documentaries that you watch just have one person's perspective of their story, as you would do, right? And even in the court case, they're dealing with the crimes in a certain time that they have to prove that crime happened. So they're not talking about things that happen on the outer edges or things that aren't applicable or things that didn't make it into the trial, right? What I'm going to try to do is take the information that I've heard, and if it's speculation, it is, and just put it in more of a timeline so you can see how people came in and people came out and people died and people, you know, got together and had fights and started having lawsuits. So I'm going to put it in a group, in a more of an order. Now, I'm going to try the best I can, but I'm going to say this, and please let this sink in. If you don't like anything I'm saying, I just want to emphasize that the government presented a case against Keith Raniere and his co-conspirators, his co-defendants. But the defendant, Keith Raniere, he never really put on a defense for himself. The state witnesses were cross-examined on his behalf, but they didn't really put on his own defense. So just keep that in mind when I'm presenting this information that I have found, that the public sphere, some of it's unchallenged. Whereas if he had put on a full-body defense, maybe some of this would have been challenged. So I just want to take note of that. You know, I'm going to be fair to say that, you know, maybe we know a little bit more negative about him than we would if he'd put on a defense. Who's to say? Maybe we would have found out more negative things, because they seemingly admitted to a whole lot of negative stuff, so who knows. But I wanted to be fair. Let's go back to 1999, shall we? You know, in part one, you've got the consumer's byline and everything's getting going with ESP, the Executive Success Program. Raniere acts as if he's a monk. Like, he calls himself allegedly a renunciate, a celibate, you know, but it's only words. In my opinion, it's words. It's just bull. It's a facade. It's a front to get people interested in what he has to say. And they won't be defensive thinking he has a sexual agenda. In hushed tones, the inner circle of ESP and NXIVM, they commonly speak about Raniere being a threat to society because of his high IQ. They've got this guy that they revere. They like his teachings. They think he's got good ideas. And they feel, many of them felt that, you know, he was being watched. That, you know, maybe it was the government, maybe it was his enemies, that people were watching him. And many of the people also believed, and I'm not saying all, but many of the people also believed Raniere could affect the weather and the technology, and like his energy field would mess with the technology. So that starts the lore and the legend back in the days. And in my opinion, Raniere chose certain women for specific reasons. For example, this is just my opinion, but the Bronfmans. In my opinion, he chose them for their money, to fund his lifestyle, and to then later fund his lawsuits. For Barbara Boucher, bless her heart, she's an intelligent, beautiful woman, but I think he chose her for her success and for her skills. Nancy Salzman, when he creates the ESP, you know, he had already come off of Amway, and he's got these MLM dreams, and he meets Nancy Salzman because Tony brings him in to meet with Nancy because, you know, he's a head case, and Nancy gets snowed by him. So he meets Nancy Salzman and sees that she's got this NLP background, she can hypnotize people, and that's what he likes about her. So he's going to suck her in. So he ends up likening her to like the head of all his education. And the young girls, you know, someone he meets, he likes them for sex. So he sees people as resources. Like what a narcissist, essentially, what he sees someone and says, how can you give me my narcissistic supply? So he'll have all kinds of women around, and only some of them are around for sex. And he might have to groom them for a long time. And there's a reason they call the word grooming. You don't groom with one stroke. You groom with many strokes, right? And some of the folks he had to groom, some of the girls he had to groom a long time, and some he didn't. Okay? So this is just my overview of the whole thought of how he selected his victims. So in 1999, you have Tony, you have Barbara Jeske, you have Pam Kafritz, again, another socialite. In my mind, he chose her for the money, but I also think he might have loved her. Kristen Keefe, Dawn Morrison, these women are in his inner circle. Lauren Salzman, that's Nancy's daughter, and I think she had 2 daughters, but Lauren's the one that you hear about. She joins ESP, that's Executive Success Program, right after her mother and Keith found it. All right, so I know that folks, especially in the documentaries, you get a certain feeling about Lauren, and again, this is just my opinion. When you go to the court files and you read things and you read emails and you really get in that and you understand the totality of the situation, Lauren was young when she joined up with this guy, and her mother is the head of these programs. And Nancy told Lauren, allegedly, that if she took classes for 6 months, this ESP at the time, that Nancy would support Lauren in anything she wanted to do after that. And Lauren never left. Could it be? Lauren admitted to doing criminal acts. That is for the court to mete out the punishment for Lauren. I don't think anyone's saying Lauren's a hero. But when you look deeply into this, I don't think you can deny that she was also victimized. So Raniere has this compound in Clifton Park, New York. It's approximately 30 minutes from Albany. There's a group of buildings at 455 and 457 New Corner Road. That's the headquarters for NXIVM, ESP NXIVM. And the buildings held the administrative offices, the cafeteria, the training rooms, and they also owned a restaurant called Apropos in Clifton Park. So they had kind of a, what would you call it? Kind of like, I wouldn't say the Disney World, but you know how you have like a captive audience, you know, where you have like a group and you have like an area and everybody can kind of get everything they need. Yeah. So Keith, he's the vanguard, who is considered the leader of this philosophical movement in 1999, give or take. And Nancy Salzman, she's the prefect, and she's the educational leader of this group. And the group members, they get accustomed to the titles, prefect, vanguard. And they're told, it's just like, you know, everybody in their life has folks they give titles to. You give titles to the police, you give titles to a judge, you give titles to your pastor or your preacher. And so what's the big deal about calling them, you know, giving them the honor of giving them the titles prefect and vanguard? So they're manipulated into giving tribute to these folks right out of the gate. And at the classes, again, they're called modules. They're all huddling in a circle, you know, at the beginning and the end. They're putting their arms around each other in these classes. They're ending with a thank you, vanguard, and also like a handshake. So there's all these ritualistic parts of these modules. And also I didn't see mention in anything except for the court file about the handshake. Their handshake had a ranking. The person of the higher rank. See, because when Sarah Edmondson mentions the handshake, she says it's like this. She didn't tell you, and it's just the way a documentary is cut, that the handshake was a certain way because whoever shook it had a higher ranking than the person underneath it. So whoever had the higher ranking would keep their hand on the top. So the person with the higher rank would have their hand over the person of the lower rank. So you're always reminded of the ranking in the pyramid. And the mission statement, they would always be reciting this mission statement. Listen to this, guys. There are no ultimate victims, therefore I will not choose to be a victim. A mission statement like that, in my opinion, is like telling people you created this. Anything that happens to you is your fault. And you can tell yourself on some kind of level, if you want to get philosophical about it, that everything in your life you've created. And it's one thing to sit with your psychologist and talk about the greater meanings of why things happen, but to adopt right out of the gate that everything that happens to you is your fault, essentially, that's dangerous, because One follower tells the court later, Keith said, quote, "There's at least one psychopath in this room." Like, that was a common thing when he taught a class he'd be riffing on. And this created a fear in people because people would look around and wonder, like, oh my God, who's the psychopath? And I got to say, and in my opinion, it was true. Keith was the psychopath in the room. At least one psychopath in the room. Yeah, you're right. Keith was the psychopath. So we talked about how the participants get hooked in with the first intensive. And they fill out these questionnaires. They were called intake forms. So towards the end of the classes, the modules, there's pressure for the participants to enroll in more classes. As you do, right? In a proper MLM, in a proper pyramid scheme. The people are encouraged to keep taking these modules and to move up what's called the stripe path. At certain levels, level 7 I do believe, a practitioner could then do EMs. And these EMs are called exploration of meaning. And most of the folks who did EMs and got paid for them allegedly would get between $65 and $200 a session. So there was no licensed therapist or licensed psychiatrist in the group, allegedly, according to the court files. I believe that Sarah Edmondson mentions in the vow that Lauren Saltzman charged over $300 for her EMs. So, I mean, you could make money if you got to level 7 and were charging for your EMs. So the proctor is the paid level, which is eligible for commission. So you have to take the classes and learn the tech and go through all the training and meet all the different levels to get to a certain point, level 7, where if you were so inclined to try to make money. That's a whole lot, that's dedication. So anyone who called the group a cult in some of these, and any of the classes, but especially in the first intensives, anyone who had the nerve to question the tech or call the group a cult, they were just called a suppressive person. So they shut that down. They shut that right down. And if there was cult talk or people worried about it being a cult, the common response that was given to them was, no, that's good. That's good you think that. We don't want reactive people here. We want critical thinkers. If someone's reactive and they're thinking, oh, this is a cult wanting to run away, we don't want them anyway. So that was their way to separate the wheat from the chaff. That was their way. And so on average, allegedly, one person out of every intensive, on average, would think it was a cult, and then they would be shooed off or asked to leave. So actually quite a few people went through and just, ran for the hills. They also were really big on feedback. Everybody having an opinion about what everybody else is doing. And I think after time, they get so shaved down that they learn not to react, not to have opinions that aren't the party line. So the way that they would get people to be open to all this feedback was this concept. If you have spinach in your teeth, would you want to know? Well, yeah, you would want to know. If you've got a piece of toilet paper on the bottom of your shoe, you want to know. I'm like one of those people be like, yo, you got a piece of toilet paper on the bottom of your shoe, and I would want to know. So that was someone who was open to feedback. They loved that. They loved that. In my opinion, the rational inquiry, the EMs, and the feedback, the system, all of it, it's designed to make people drop their boundaries and to be manipulated. And it worked, at least for some. There were some that, probably never took the classes. They said no thank you right away. Some that took the classes and left. Some that were like kind of shooed off because they said things that they didn't believe it. Like they felt culty, and so they left. So early 2000s, there's a Mexican family. This is some of the worst stuff that's in the court trial is regarding the Mexican family. And I'm going to try to be sensitive about it and just use the first names. It's out in the public domain. I just don't feel the need to drag victims. Raniere offered to mentor, tutor 4 of the children of this Mexican family. There's 3 girls and there's 1 boy. And additionally, he ends up having sex with the 3 daughters. Yeah. You heard me right. By the end of this whole entire saga, this man has turned blood against blood. And that to me is just unforgivable. I mean, all the stuff he's done is unforgivable. So there's 3 girls that he ends up having sex with. Mariana is the oldest one. Daniela is the middle child. And Camilla is the young child. And Camilla is the one that he ends up getting the charges for. because she was underage. He waits till Danny's 18. Yeah, this is where, that's where he's got his charge, most of his charges. That's part of why he's 120 years going to be in jail. So he's going to die in jail due to that. But think what year I just told you, early 2000s. This is way before India Oxenberg. This is way before all these other people that you hear about in the documentary. All these documentaries that are out there. He was already, in my opinion, committing all these criminal acts. And it's going to get darker. 2001. Raniere begins a sexual relationship with Lauren Saltzman, Nancy's daughter. Yes, he does. 2001. And at the trial, Nancy spoke about how Raniere helped her mother when her mother worked for Con Edison. Now, this is pre-ESP. So it was a nuclear power plant, and it was going through deregulation. I do believe that happened in 1998. And so Raniere starts helping Nancy, talking to her how to implement this managing system for deregulation at Con Edison. And so this is one of the ways that Raniere also gained Nancy's trust, because he had some ideas and he helped her come up with some, I guess, innovations or something. And so that was part of the reason why Nancy was just totally smitten with Raniere, and Lauren trusted Raniere. And then, of course, ESP starts and all that stuff. So we know that her mother, Nancy, went on to found ESP with Raniere. And so Keith starts this relationship with Lauren, the daughter. And it goes on between 2001 and 2008. So they're having a physical relationship for 7 years. Let that sink in, how long that is. And it stops for 10 years, maybe, give or take, 9 years, and it picks up again in 2017, and that's when DOS starts up, because she joins DOS, and the part of that is a sexual relationship with Keith Raniere. So that's that timeline. People don't really talk about that much. It's in the court file, and she will tell you all about it in the transcripts. She testified that Raniere would look at her in her underwear to assess whether she had the proper fat distribution on her body, and he concluded that she should be 100 pounds. That was her ideal weight, that she should shoot for 100 pounds. She also talked about how Raniere lived, and we're talking the early 2000s, 2001, with Pam Kafritz, who's now deceased, Karen Unterreiner, and Kristen Keefe. All right, so he already lived with the three ladies at 3 Flintlock Lane when he took up with Lauren. And eventually he took on Mariana, the sister from the Mexicans that I've already mentioned, the 3 Mexican sisters. Well, he took Mariana into that home. So all this is going on when he starts up a relationship with Lauren. I know it's nuts. So on April 1st, 2001, that's when Lauren begins the sexual relationship with Keith. But the defendant asks her not to tell anyone. So not to tell any of the ladies in the main house, at least initially. So according to Lauren, Keith instructed the inner circle, the ladies in the inner circle, the ones that obviously he's living with, on their personal grooming habits downstairs, their pubic hair. So he was in charge of that. No grooming. That was not acceptable. And if you loved Keith, this is me paraphrasing, if you loved him and respected his wishes, you wouldn't groom yourself. Keith also would initiate threesomes. This is going to get spicy. So if you don't like, I'm not going to get deep. I'm just going to tell you what I need to tell you. But if you don't like that, you can click off now. I would want to hurl too. He would initiate threesomes once the inner circle figured out that he was having relations with Lauren as well. So he indulged in sex with Lauren, and sometimes Lauren said she didn't really like it, and she didn't necessarily like it when he would initiate other people that, in the inner circle to be in these threesomes. That also he used Lauren to intervene with the third parties, because think he's living with 3 or 4 ladies, all right? And then he's got Lauren that he's seeing on the side on the DL, and then he's blending that back in. And so there's going to be kind of dramas and fights and things he's promised different people, and he would use Lauren to mediate. And he probably used them all to mediate, but she testified how she was used to mediate between the different parties whenever they were not getting along or warring about a different idea. I hesitate to say warring. That implies that someone had actually the ability to fight with him. He was very, very, very manipulative. So she intervened with the others to try to tamp down whenever there were interpersonal dramas. So in 2001, enter the Bronfman sisters. You have Sarah Bronfman and Claire Bronfman. They're the Seagram's heiresses. And I think in the trial against Keith Raniere, Claire is just known as the heiress. Sarah wasn't charged with anything, just Claire. So they were interested in ESP, the NXIVM, and the Bronfman ladies had allegedly led a very sheltered existence. Claire had not finished high school, allegedly, and even Edgar, their father, had taken a class as well, so he was aware of the group, but he just opted out. It wasn't his cup of tea, and they stayed on, and I will get more into them because they play a big part in this, but I'm going to keep going in my timeline to 2002. You have a girl named Anna. She is in one of the documentaries, so we're just going to call her Anna. She was doing ESP in Mexico City, and within 6 months of her taking her first intensive in Mexico City, she was in Albany, New York, and she had a psychotic break, according to her own testimony, having a total nervous breakdown. And after doing the level 2 intensive with Nancy Salzman in Albany, New York, according to her, she ran away, half naked, and kept silent about the group for fear of the group's retaliation, all right? Years later, during the trial against Keith Raniere, Lauren Salzman testifies. And it's important because it's pretty obvious, in my opinion, that she's talking about Anna here. And Lauren confessed to the court to twice pilling this victim. And see, what happened, the reason why it made it into the court is Lauren was explaining the collateral she gave for DOS. And I'm going to get into that. But this was something that she gave as collateral. And she said that she offered this to Raniere, and he rejected it. But here's the collateral. She said, there had been a woman this is a quote, there had been a woman from Mexico who had come to take an ESP course. And in the days of the course, she had what I would characterize as a psychotic episode, like a psychotic break. ... In my opinion, she would have been hospitalized. ... And she showed up at the volleyball where Keith was and became very agitated and physically violent to the people around her. And he suggested, that would be Keith, ... that we can drive around in the car and try to calm her down. ... And then eventually he told us to take her to a friend's house. ... And then he was communicating through my mom to me. And later he said it would be good if she could sleep. ... And so we couldn't get her to calm down or sleep. He told my mom that if she took Valium, she could sleep. Now I'm going to end the quote. There's some ums and ahs and parts that didn't pertain and things, but that was the quote. She didn't take the Valium. She didn't want to take the Valium. Anna, or the victim, should I say, didn't want to take the Valium, according to Lauren. So, quote, basically pilled her I pilled my cat. I took the Valium and I put it right down her throat. That's a quote from Lauren, under oath. The next morning, they put Valium in her scrambled eggs. Lauren Salzman's testimony to the court. So I think that Anna was telling the truth because it's under oath as well. At least it didn't say Anna. It said a girl from Mexico City who came to Albany and had a psychotic break after a level 2 intensive. I think I can put 2 and 2 together and probably say it was Anna, who then went and talked on the documentary. So allegedly it was Lauren's father's Valium that Nancy had, and her mother had it and supplied it. So Lauren put the story together to give to Keith as her collateral for DOS, and it was rejected. You want to know why it was rejected? Think about it. Because it implicated Keith. That's not good. That's not good collateral. You can't implicate me in your criminal misdeeds. this guy's a piece of work, isn't he? We're going to go on to 2002. We're going to talk about some really strange deaths, okay? This case is really, it's stunning. And I always want to give a takeaway. And I'm going to give a takeaway after maybe the final episode. So I'm going to leave you hanging. There are always takeaways in life. There's always things that we can learn. I think that we could always be really cautious about people manipulating us. And we have to just be aware that it can be done so subtly. But we also have to look out for the folks around us. And sometimes we have to do interventions. And we have to do things to get our relatives out of pickles. And our loved ones out of pickles. But long story short, I want to say thank you so much for watching. I will pick up with 2002 in part 3, and we will just go all the way. We'll go all the way through him fleeing to Mexico, well, DOS creation and all the stuff that goes on in DOS. That's the horror, you know. And we'll go through him fleeing to Mexico and being brought back to the U.S. and going to trial. We'll go through all of it, but we'll also talk about the different players involved, and you'll get an idea of how he crafted this, how he was able to get in somebody's mind. And I will read to you some things that will be quite compelling, and I think that you'll start to get a broader view of this, that these aren't just dummies that he did this to. These were intelligent women and men. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you pushing that, doing the YouTube-y things, pushing the like button and hitting the subscribe bell. And without further ado, have an excellent day. Bye.